20 minutes or so is just run through this presentation about affordable housing and sustainability. You'll see that the kind of first set of slides is by Rose Hunter, who is the Sustainable Living Coordinator for the Housing Association, Devon and Cornwall Housing. It's important to say at the beginning, Devon and Cornwall Housing is not Devon and Cornwall's Housing Association. It is a private company. There are lots of other housing associations in Devon and Cornwall. Local authorities also provide housing as well. So this is just one example of one private company, and it is a company owned by shareholders, makes a profit for those shareholders. So, you know, it is to be seen within that context. But nonetheless, they obviously have a kind of corporate social responsibility element to them, which means that they want to promote more sustainable living. So these slides are mostly by Rose, and I've inserted some slides, one like this, just to give the framework, which we'll be talking about a bit later on this afternoon. The policy framework for housing and therefore sustainable housing enshrined in various ways. The first one is Planning Policy Statement 3. You know that we have PPS's Planning Policy Statements, what used to be called Planning Policy Guidance Notes. And they set out the general planning framework, the guidance of how, in this case, housing should proceed. And those are in local areas based on two other things. The second one there, HNAs, or Housing Needs Assessments. Housing needs assessments are, I suppose it does what it says on the tin, it assesses housing need. But housing need in this instance is always not simply the number of people who are on a housing register looking for houses, but it's also the number of people in any given local authority area who are considered to be what we call a concealed household. In other words, there are people living within an existing household, okay, people perhaps your age, who eventually will want to set up another household within the area, and therefore they need to be counted towards what the local authority needs to provide, as well as unknowns like immigration to the local authority area. And we've done quite a few housing needs assessments with the guys who are coming this afternoon from North Devon. We've done a rural and an urban needs survey for them. And we've gone beyond the kind of basic requirements with them. But that's always to be seen in conjunction with housing market assessments, HMAs, which are intended to understand where the housing market in any particular locality is going. And the big problem with doing both of these things really within a local authority is, of course, housing is permeable, it permeates boundaries, it isn't seen within the context of just a local authority area. So most of these things, particularly housing market assessments, are always undertaken in collaboration with other authorities. So North Devon works very closely with Torridge District Council as well. And therefore, obviously the main people that oversee all these things are local authorities, but they're constantly working in association with developers like Devon and Cornwall Housing. So that's the general policy framework, and as Rose says here, as a social housing provider, we rely on funding from the government, partly. I mean, they're a company, but they need basic funding to do their work. So how does their commitment to sustainable development translate into how we build new homes? And really, this is still up to the housing developer to initiate. I mean, this development only happened because Devon and Cornwall Housing themselves felt that they wanted to do it. It's not an actual requirement to build houses like the ones we're looking at this afternoon. And as a housing association, they're kind of conditions of getting public funding that they have to meet these kind of basic criteria. So the government has a decent home standard that is to be met by 2010, and that of course is to do with basic things like heating, windows, and acceptable living conditions, having a good quality of life, good living conditions. Affordable warmth, affordable heat and water. Traditionally, a lot of people who live in houses which are run by housing associations or local authorities have key meters for their electricity, which are really inefficient. So there's quite a wide nationwide programme to replace those with more efficient means. And you've got a lot of other things here, eco-home standards, which I'll talk about in a moment, a client's charter, almost every public body has those kind of things now, sustainable development and environmental management, basic kind of requirements that you would expect. So these are the kind of things that underlie the way a housing association develops its sort of Oak Meadow. I mean, you've seen a bit of it, you'll see a bit more of it a bit later on. Oak Meadow, based in the town of South Molton, and the estate that we're on is also owned and managed by the housing association. So the conventional 1980s brick-built properties behind us are also owned by the housing association. Until very recently it used to be on the edge, and if you look out the windows to your left here, you will see they're building more houses, which I think most people are very upset about because it's going to spoil their beautiful view across the countryside. Just a bit of information here on Oak Meadow, 34 families and individuals, and critically this site was developed with specific types of individuals in mind, particularly those people who have disabilities. So some of the units have been specially adapted to cope with people with mobility problems, and also people with health issues, particularly people who have asthmatic problems. So for example, you walk around houses, carpets are not allowed. So when you sign your tenancy agreement, you agree not to fit carpets. You can have rugs, but you must not have carpets. And so, you know, this is the basic kind of description of the site. There's a plan like that in one of the leaflets I've given you, but you can see, firstly, the main thing you see is that all of the houses in some way face south or southwest, so they make maximum use of the sun, and of course not all of them, as you'll see, have solar panels. It's actually just these ones here, which is where Gale lives, that have solar heating. They couldn't afford to put it in on all of them. There's a potential to do that because of the way that they face. The top right of the slide shows a lot of trees, and that's supposed to be a wildlife corridor which leads from the open fields to the left into some more open land down to the south here. So it's supposed to be a wildlife corridor anyway, and I think it's used mostly by the kids for cycling and running around in. And you could see it's comprised of basically 5 terraced blocks, and on the left here the cross-shaped building is where we are in the community centre. As it says, Oak Meadow is designed to achieve Eco Home's excellent rating, but it only got very good. And the reason, as we'll see in a minute, it didn't get excellence is because Eco Home's ratings are not only about what the property is like and what's in the property, it's also about what is around the property. A lot of it, as it says here, is about public transport. So, are people able to live somewhere without the need to drive a car all the time? Answer for Oak Meadow is, well, probably not. Unless you work in the town and you do your shopping in the town and you don't aspire to go anywhere else, it's quite easy not to have a car. But if you need to get somewhere outside the town, there aren't many bus services. The classic thing, if you walk around the corner, there is a bus shelter, but there are no buses. So the developer put in a bus shelter, and the local authority said, yes, we'll subsidise the service, but it never actually happened. So it only achieved a kind of very good rating rather than excellent rating, which demonstrates, when you look around these properties, how difficult it is to get an excellent rating, which is surprising given what these properties are like. Basic properties of what is contained in the kind of construction of the houses, all the kind of things you would expect, I suppose. I won't read them out, but obviously the typical things you would expect. Plus, when you go around, some really nice novel features. One of the nicest things that you can look at in Gale's house is what you would have traditionally called a larder, a cold room for storing things like vegetables. Okay? And that is kept cold through a little ventilator which brings up cold air from a clay pipe which is dug into the ground. The cold air is brought up by a little fan, and the fan is powered by a photovoltaic cell on the roof. So the air is circulated like that. So it's a nice little novel features which Gale will point out.